Welcome back to Tide Pod on the YouTube home of Tide Illustrated. Jack Knowlton and about a 55% Tony Tsoukalis, who's on the injury or / availability report this week due to illness. He's fighting through it. Respect to Tony. And he's fighting through it because there is a great game that Tony did not want to miss recapping for you fine folks who listen and watch this great podcast because Alabama basketball have become road warriors. The Tide 102-97 win over Kentucky in Rupp Arena. It is the second top 10 win this team has had in SEC play, Tony. We obviously wanted to recap it and look ahead briefly to Vanderbilt, which Alabama will play on Tuesday when you're listening to this show. But, Tony, I want to start with that. Alabama 102, Kentucky 97. This team is now 5-1 in true road games. They have beaten then number 10 Texas A&M and now number 8 Kentucky on the road in SEC play alone. They're the only team in history to have wins in Rupp Arena and the Dean Dome at North Carolina in the same season. Wild stat. Nate Oates, after the Kentucky game, said, "Part of me almost thinks some of these guys like playing on the road. Real competitors sometimes like going in a little bit more hostile environment, coming out with a big win that nobody expected." Tony, does Alabama like to play on the road more than at home? It sure seems like what we've seen so far this year.
I think it's a product of Alabama being just good enough to beat anybody, and it really comes down to the effort they put out. I mean, I think that we've seen this Alabama team maybe play down to its competition. I think that's what happened against Ole Miss. Not to take anything away from Ole Miss, because I think Ole Miss is a good team, but I think that's what happened in the midweek last week. And then you come out when Alabama's fully focused and they're clicking. There's just so many ways that Alabama can beat you. You know, they can shoot the threes, but the Tennessee game, the thing I saw was just having Grant Nelson and Mo Dioubate just drive to the hoop, and then the athleticism they have with those two guys. There's just a million ways this team can beat you, and so yeah, they can win tough games on the road. I think it probably gets those juices flowing a little bit more. I'm not sure if that's what Nate Oates wants to see. I think he probably would want a consistent, performance, but hey, he'll take it. 2 top 10 wins, back-to-back top 10 wins in the SEC. In this SEC is just incredible.
Yeah, I mean, they did a good job. I was in Rupp Arena for the game, and one thing, I just kind of noticed is every time it felt like Kentucky, and we'll get into the offense for Alabama, but every time it felt like Kentucky, had really gotten their crowd all the way back into it and they were about to kind of blow the roof off the place, Alabama just had enough of an answer that kind of subdued things a little bit. And they really were able to control the environment well. I thought they did that at Texas A&M as well. You saw, the clip of LeBaron Philon after that game where he's waving off the student sections and telling them to go to sleep and all that stuff. Kentucky, the locker room was right by the media area and you could hear them getting pretty rowdy playing music. And they do, I think, a little bit relish kind of the chance to go on the road and send a fan base home unhappy. So I think that is a real positive trait. And I think you're right. It does speak to this team's ability to kind of beat everybody.
I think I saw LeBaron do the same thing against Texas A&M. He can get kind of trolly when it comes to the fans. I kind of love to see it. You got to have at least one of those guys on your team.
Definitely.
That can be that guy. So
yeah, he was hyping up Grant Nelson, who we'll also get into in a second. But I wanted to ask you this as well, Tony, kind of on a more general, when you look back at this game, you mentioned the Ole Miss response. It was real ugly. I don't think we did a show after that game, so this is technically the first one. Nate Oates called it disgusting and really criticized the team's effort and said they needed to respond. After the Kentucky game, he's kind of, doubled on that, even though the team did respond. He said, we need to deserve to win from now on, and it better start with guys putting so much time and effort that they're not going to surrender, which is another pretty kind of galvanizing quote. But after such a strong message that Oates sent, in practice, and then we heard right before the Kentucky game that the players were starting to respond. They showed that in a big way on the road. Just what was your assessment of this team's response? Because it feels like now that game can be a real turning point the rest of the way here.
Yeah, we'll have to see. My column today was about no more snap judgments in the SEC because heading into last week, I said that Alabama was the new, or they returned to being the SEC title favorite. Then they come out and put a stinker against Ole Miss, and I was ready to go, write about how wrong I was because I was kind of thinking that they were going to lose against Kentucky as well. And then they come out and they answer the bell against Kentucky, and all of a sudden now they might be they might once again be the favorite in the SEC, with their ability to win on the road and the potential they have. But I'm not calling that anymore. I think you got to take things one game at a time. I think it's real tempting to say that Ole Miss loss will be a turning point in this season, and then it could be galvanizing, and it certainly seems that way after you look at the Kentucky game and how well Alabama played, and the blue collar mentality that they had in that one. You saw Mo Dioubate just stand on his head in terms of effort. That's all encouraging. They're going to play another team. It's almost like they'll get a repeat of Ole Miss this week against Vanderbilt. They got a pesky team that is kind of overlooked. Great at turnover differential. Can really turn you over. Can hit some threes. Catch you off guard. Not the biggest team, just kind of hustles. It's like they're playing Ole Miss again. And so, do they come out prepared? I think you'll see a lot about like how much that Ole Miss win meant to Alabama when they play Vanderbilt. I think it's a lot easier to get hyped up for a game in Rupp Arena. I think, sure, it helps that Alabama was coming off a loss and that they played extra motivated. But how about a game in Coleman? Who knows? It's going to be freezing cold. I don't know if the ice is going to be on the roads or whatever. Like, it could not, theoretically, it could not be a very attended game. Some of the fans from Birmingham, are they going to be able to get there in time? Is there going to be any kind of hazardous weather that, prevents that? So, like, you could see the mood being a little bit dampened heading into that Vanderbilt game. How do the players respond? It's not going to be the same vibe as playing a Kentucky team, but you're going to need to have that energy, because I think Vanderbilt's a team that can, pull your pants down for a second straight time in Coleman. And, losing 2 home games in the SEC to, nothing against Ole Miss and Vanderbilt, but I think losing 2 home games against those teams is probably a death blow to your title chances, because you're gonna have to play your Auburns and your Mississippi States and stuff like that. So it'll be interesting to see, but at the same time, I guess the hope is that Ole Miss loss was as galvanizing as it seems, and that this could be a real big turning point for this team.
It's a very good point. You have to gear up for a Tuesday 6 p.m. tip on SEC Network in the cold. You're right about the fans. How much will they attend that game? It's a good point. But yeah, I think they proved it, at least on the road. They can go out and make and rise to the occasion. Clearly, they're fueled by that road environment. You'd rather a team be fueled than cripple or crumple, and kind of just regress on the road. So it's a good sign there. But yeah, going forward, it has to be big. Let's get in a little bit to how Alabama did it. Of course, 102 points on the road. Scored 100. They've scored 100 points in both road games against A&M and Kentucky now as well. And going back to the response against Ole Miss, safe to say there was no Malik Dia for Kentucky. The front court had a lot better of a response for Alabama. Grant Nelson, the man of the hour, of course, 25 points was an Alabama career high for him. 19 of them came in the first half, by the way. He had not made a 3 since the SEC opener against Oklahoma. Airballed his first shot and then goes on to make the next 2 as part of a early kill shot for Alabama, gets a 10-0 run. He finishes with 25 and 11. Clifford Omoruyi, 12 points. That's the most he scored since the second game of the season. He had the same tally against Arkansas State. Had 7 rebounds and 2 blocks. Looked really good, I thought, offensively. And then you mentioned Mohamed Diabate a couple times. 8 points, 8 rebounds. He was plus 21 in 15 minutes on the floor, which is pretty remarkable if you know anything about box plus minus. Nate Oates, kind of said in that quote about liking to win on the road, he said, it starts with Mohamed Diabate. He's a tough kid from Queens, New York, and nothing really phases him. What was different to you about the front court, particularly with some of these guys offensively? And feel free to highlight Nelson, Omoruyi, Diabate as you please.
Yeah, I mean, Grant Nelson is the biggest, example of veterans stepping up on this team. I mean, not only did he have a career high in points, he was also 9 of 10, and from the free throw line, I think he was 3 of 7 against Ole Miss, and he had those two key misses after the technical that I wrote about it. I thought it really cost Alabama the game in terms of momentum against Ole Miss. It was a real big turning point in that one. He comes in, according to Nate Oates, He comes in on Thursday of last week. He was like 90 of 100 in the gym.
Yep.
Then on Friday, he was 91 of 100. And then obviously that, that kind of, when you drill yourself like that, it leads to you going 9 of 10. And that was big. Free throws were big for Alabama against Kentucky. And I thought that, he really answered the bell. I know you asked about the front court, but also, Mark Sears was also key. And, you saw Nate Oates talk to his veterans, and I think to have Mark Sears and Grant Nelson combined for, 49 points. I think
Yep.
that was a great way to step up, and it shows that, they were listening. It shows, and Mark Sears didn't have the best, he wasn't very efficient in terms of his shooting. It wasn't a great shooting night for him, but I thought he played better on defense. He had 9 assists. I think he only had 1 turnover. So you really had your veterans. You mentioned Cliff Omoruyi, 2 blocks. He's starting to look more like what Alabama, I guess you would say, bought in the transfer portal. He had a huge NIL deal, but he might never be the offensive. His offensive numbers might never look sexy, but I think his defense comes up big, and I think his defense does a lot to open up the games. For Mo Dioubate or Grant Nelson. So I think that's really big. But you had, once again, another veteran step up. And I think that's really encouraging. When you go and you have a meeting with the team, you go and you talk to your key veterans and they respond like that. That's key. That shows that this team has the winning mentality that it's going to need in order to make a run.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought Nelson stepped up in a big way. Oates kind of called him one of the quieter players on the team, wants to see him be more vocal. And I thought he did step up and at least led by example on Saturday. And just to kind of, I'll give my take on the front court, sort of from what I watched. I thought it was just, and we'll get into more of Alabama's offense with the guard play too, and talk about Mark Sears, because he, of course, deserves a mention as well with 24 points. But I thought the front court really attacked well on Saturday. And you wrote about this, and Nate Oates had a great quote about it. He stole a term from Joe Mazzulla. He called some of Kentucky's players SEALs, kind of described sort of the sitting duck mentality. You go out and you attack the SEALs that you see when you have a mismatch and stuff like that. And I thought all 3 of those guys did a really good job of that. Alabama has struggled on some inbounds plays this season, and they had a couple of weird ones on Saturday, but they had some that worked really well because guys like Nelson and Dioubate got the ball, realized they had a mismatch, or a guard would set a screen and a switch would come. I know there was one, Aiden Holloway set one for Mo, and Mo was able to roll off it and had an easy and one because he was going up on a guard. So it was really good to see those guys recognizing it. And then Cliff as well. You mentioned, his offensive numbers won't look sexy. I think Nate Oates will take 12 and 7 from him all day long. I think he has really started to emerge, I think, as a lob threat. You saw at the opening tip, he wins the jump ball. Mark Sears kind of sets like a backdoor screen. Nelson lobs it to him from the 3-point line. He had a couple dunks in this game that were just really great finds from the guards and the other players. I think he's learning how to be kind of a lob threat, and that's really good for Alabama because it opens things up for other guys too. You have to respect Omoruyi as a roller and as a lob threat. I thought all 3 of those guys played really, really well in terms of finding mismatches and creating kind of lanes and space for everybody else.
Yeah, you're still in your first year covering Alabama. The inbounding woes have been a problem for
So I've heard.
as long as I can remember. It's an Alabama tradition like no other. But yeah, I think that one of the things, going back to what you said about Nate Oates and his Joe Mazzulla quote about it's not just SEALs, it's killer whales. And that's really the full quote there, and it's how killer whales attack in pods. A killer whale can kill a seal by itself, but they hunt in pods regardless. And that's how Nate Oates wants to attack weaknesses on other teams. And so that they were able to kind of do that with the inbounding. They set things up to give themselves advantages. We especially saw that with them throwing the ball out to Grant Nelson and Mo Dioubate on the elbow and setting up those drives where they're just more athletic than Kentucky's bigs, and they were able to kind of get some momentum, either draw a foul or get a layup, or in a couple times both. Yeah, I think that's super encouraging. And like you said, Amori sets a lot of that up too, because he requires so much attention that he sets up some of those roles, and I think that's key for Alabama moving forward.
And I'll give one more shout out to Mo Dioubate too. Maybe my favorite play in the game. He rips down a rebound after a missed Kentucky three, and it was actually a rebound. It was like punched up in the air by Mark Sears. He couldn't quite grab it. Dioubate beats the Kentucky guy in the air, grabs it, runs all the way down the floor. Looks like he's going to go up against two defenders and then just lofts it over the top. And Amore, like, I thought he would do a one-handed dunk, and he just kind of pushed it into the hoop, and it went down as a layup. I thought that kind of embodied the blue collar stuff from him. He won the hard hat, so that was maybe my favorite play of the game. Just another nod to the front court, but that's how Alabama, kind of got things going there. And then obviously a lot of these guards deserve a shout out. First of all, Nate Oates, we saw at the end of the game kind of switching to a 3-guard lineup. There was a lot of fouls called late on in this one. Grant Nelson had 4 in the second half. Jaron Stevenson ran into some foul trouble. Aiden Holloway as well. Morey picked a few up, but you saw at the end, Alabama goes on a 9-0 run to close the game. And that entire lineup, it was kind of switching between whether it was Nelson, Stevenson and Amore, Nelson, Amore, whoever. And then you had the 3 guards out there with Chris Youngblood, LeBaron Philon, Mark Sears, all 3 in double figures. Chris Youngblood, 10 points. LeBaron Philon had 15 and 4 assists, which you talk about another guy who got in the gym and bounced back like Nelson did. And then Mark Sears, like you mentioned, Tony, 24 points, 9 assists as well for Mark Sears. Tide goes on a 9-0 run. They had 2 10-0 runs earlier in the game. What'd you like maybe about, kind of that, maybe whether you saw anything in particular from the 3-guard lineups out there, just what you made from any of those guys, Sears, Philon, and Youngblood's performances?
There was one possession, and maybe this is my sickness and it's all a fog, and so like maybe I'm not remembering this right, where they missed, Mark Sears missed 2 shots and they got 2 offensive rebounds, and they still dished it out to him again for a third and he made it.
Mm-hmm.
Am I making that up?
No, I know that happened against Texas A&M. It probably, they were good on the O boards again today, but it probably happened again.
I just think that the confidence they have in their shooters, a game like that for Mark Sears, he didn't shoot the ball super well, but he had the confidence to make big shots, and I think the team just trusts him as well. So, I think that's a big. You mentioned Philon with his 15 points. I mean, he was pretty dreadful. He was really put up a couple stinkers. After winning SEC Freshman of the Week, I guess. 2 weeks ago, he had been kind of a downturn. So for him to come back, shoot 4 of 10, 3 of 5 from 3, that was really big as well. And he had 3 O boards. LeBaron Philon was great, and I think you're seeing him return to his his typical form. And once again, we talked about Alabama winning at North Carolina and at Kentucky. This is another time where LeBaron Philon goes into a big team's gym.
He loves it.
Game. Like, he is a big time player. And so, like, when you talk about players that are going to, when Alabama goes into the jungle, or, even when they go play in the tournament, I think that he is going to be just a key player for Alabama. He loves these big games, and you love to see that, because for a freshman to be this good at the, under the spotlight, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, LeBaron Philon I thought was fantastic. Another guy, Nate Oates, just on Monday here, we talked with him before the Vanderbilt game, and he said, it's funny. I told the guys, it's funny how much your shot connects when you get in the gym and practice them. And he said Philon's kind of off the court habits have gotten a lot better in the last week since, kind of went away from some things, it looked like. And obviously his game has reflected both the bad that he was experiencing and now this kind of return to form. So I agree. I thought he was fantastic and continues to just be a pest defensively. He only had 1 steal, but it was a really impressive one. He just kind of got in the face of a Kentucky guard as soon as the pass came into him, never really controlled it. Finally kind of pushes the ball away from him, goes down the court, draws a foul, gets 2 free throws for himself. And then, the one guy I want to ask you about further too, is Mark Sears. I mentioned the 24 points, the 9 assists. Tony, Mark Sears in SEC play has a 3.7 assist to turnover ratio. I think it's something like 36 or 37 assists to like 8 or 9 turnovers or something in SEC play. Nate Oates brought up the stat today. He has 22 more assists through 18 games this season than he did last year, and he's only scored 15 fewer points. He's had 20 points at least in every game in conference play, aside, of course, from Ole Miss, where he had 11. Seems like, to me, Sears has found, a kind of evolved level, and it's come a long way from when we thought, oh, is Sears going to kind of regress from, last season and not be the All-American player we saw? I think, if we're talking about turning a corner for this team, I think individually, to me, Mark Sears is growing into this player who is figuring out how to not only be Alabama's go-to scorer when they need him to be, but has really upped the creativity. And I think there is something to say about the players around him, being a little bit more quality, being able to hit shots. But I've been really impressed with his kind of playmaking ability recently.
Yeah, for certain. I mean, he is like I said, earlier on, that the 9 assists were key.
Mm-hmm.
He's a more complete player than he was last year. I think that, maybe the offensive numbers aren't quite there. We mentioned the shooting struggles, but I think there's a lot of ways to argue that even if the stats don't show it, he is a more, full on, like, I think he contributes arguably more to the team this year than he did last year. And so I think that that's really good to see. And so I think that, once again, I think when you look at this team and moving forward, that's just another encouraging spot that to really have.
I think it's really scary too when you look at this offense in general to see how much they were struggling as a team, and then all of a sudden, they went 38% from three, had those 2 10-0 runs. Like, this is still one of those Alabama teams in classic Nate Oates fashion that can just, I think Dan Schulman, who was calling the game, literally said it. It was, at the end of the game, it was 81-80, and all of a sudden you're like, it's 91-81, and this game is over with a minute to go, and those are the kind of sort of scoring pops that Alabama was still working to get to, and you saw them get to it. Yes, against a pretty weak Kentucky defense overall compared to some other teams they face. You want to see that against the likes of Vanderbilt and the Mississippi States of the world. But I think their offense had a really big just kind of pop in this game, and I'm excited to see how they kind of carry that momentum forward. Any final takeaways from Kentucky? Anything we missed that you observed? I hate to do that to you in your sick state, but any
No,
other
I've been a little bit distracted while you were talking. I was trying to make sure that my brain fog from earlier, the Mark Sears thing, that didn't happen in one possession. I went back and looked. He missed late in the first quarter. He missed the 3, and then missed another 3 maybe a minute later, and then he hit a 3. That's what I had it written down. That Mark's persistence at 3, and I was trying to remember what it was, but now that I'm looking back at it, that was the case. So it missed back-to-back threes and different. It wasn't all in one possession. I had that written down wrong, but once again, I think just the continued confidence and that both the team has in him and the that he has in himself. I think that's great.
Yeah, it's massive. I mean, this team, Nate Oates will never tell a player to stop shooting. I mean, look at Grant Nelson. He airballed his first 3 by about 15 feet and drilled the next 2, shot 7 of them for the game, despite, going over literally in conference play until that first made 3. So, yeah, I really loved what we saw offensively from this Alabama team. And now, of course, they have to keep rolling. They go back home. They'll be home for the next 2 games against Vanderbilt and LSU. They face the Commodores first, 6 p.m. Tuesday on SEC Network. You can watch it. Vanderbilt is 15-3. They are 3-2 in the SEC, but got a 3rd win in pretty spectacular fashion. Beat in-state rival Tennessee, who was number 6 in the country at the time. Upset them at home. This Vanderbilt team is pretty dangerous, Tony. What have you seen just kind of looking around their roster from them? Mark Byington in his first season, of course, comes over from James Madison, led them to the round of 32 last year. I'm a big fan of him, by the way, as a side note. But what do you like about Vanderbilt?
Well, it's a completely new roster too. I mean, that's kind of like what happens in today's day and age when you when you have a new coach. You first of all, you pretty much in college basketball have a new roster every year, anyways. But when you have a new head coach, it's almost certain that you have a new roster. I think I read somewhere in the game notes that they ranked 9th in the nation in terms of minutes played last season. So it's an experienced bunch. yeah, it's a once again, this is a situation where they're kind of like an Ole Miss, where sleep on them at your own peril, because I think this is a team that's a pretty decent team, and they can beat you on both sides of the ball. I don't think they're quite as good as Ole Miss, but they're definitely capable of pulling the upset like Ole Miss was, and really pesky defensive team. Like I said, can shoot, not the biggest team. Um, and I just think something that if Alabama comes out with its blue collar mentality, they should be able to find a way to pull out a win. I think Alabama's got way more talent than Vanderbilt, and I think there's so many ways that Alabama can beat you. So even if the shots aren't there, if they take care of the ball, if they hustle, if they get the O boards, they should be able to make something happen. I'd like to see Alabama take advantage of its size. I think that's something that it kind of failed to do against Ole Miss. I think that this would be another opportunity to do so. I think the tallest person on Vanderbilt's starting lineup, I think, is 6'7". So this could be an opportunity to play. Whether or not you go big with Cliff Omoruyi and try to get him the ball down low, or maybe you match. Maybe this is a game where Mo Dioubate is 6'7" too, but he plays above his height. So maybe I don't know if they used him enough against Ole Miss. Also, one other thing too is Aiden Sherrill. A couple times we've heard Nate Oates talk about like, oh, I should have used Aiden Sherrill more here. It seems like he doesn't know how to use him. If Alabama does want to go big, why not give him some minutes in this one? I mean, if that's a way that you can take advantage of a Vanderbilt team, give it to him. He's a 5-star kid, All-American kid. So, yeah, this is a tough team, but I think it's a team that if Alabama comes out the right way, they should come away with a win.
I was doing my player power rankings, which you should go read on Tide Illustrated, that came out today. And I was looking at Aiden Sherrill. He had a really, really fun 5-minute span against Ole Miss. I would encourage everyone to go watch that. He had an and one, had a nice layup, just looked good in his limited role. And I know, like, it's big in the SEC. You're never really going to expect that much. You can trust me, name me the last superstar freshman center who's been drafted, in the top 10 in the NBA draft. It just doesn't happen. You've got to get bigger. Even Donovan Clingan was a sophomore last year. So, it takes time for bigs in particular, but I like his potential. And yeah, this could be a game where you maybe use him. I wanted to bring up my favorite Mark Byington thing. I'm a big Mark Byington fan. I'm looking forward to talking with him after the game. I don't know if you saw this in the offseason when he first took over Vanderbilt. Their roster on the website changed, and every player was a point guard. How do you feel about that? I loved that. I loved that move. I thought it was corny and great.
It's kind of corny, but I think that you need certain things like that to kind of set a tone in your first year. So I'm not against it. If I had to I know what everybody plays anyways, but it probably hurts when I'm filling out who plays what in our how to watch. But other than that, I'm pretty okay with it.
Well, and hey, if their tallest starter's 6'7", I mean, you got 6'7" point guards in the NBA.
Sure, yeah.
They can all be point guards. No, I like that. My two stats with Vanderbilt. We talked about Ole Miss. Turnovers was a huge thing in that game. Alabama gave it up 21 times. Vanderbilt is number 8 in opponent turnover percentage. They are a better team when it comes to actually forcing takeaways than Ole Miss is. Ole Miss played a defense that kind of switched everything and really frustrated Alabama. Vanderbilt just flat out takes the ball away, Tony. What's the stat you found with steals? They've had 15 steals. What was it, 3 times this year?
Yeah, I mean, they had 15 steals against South Carolina, but they also had 18 against California and then 15 against Austin Peay. That's not 15 turnovers. That's 15 steals in a game. That's incredible. To have 15 steals once in a season is big. And they had it 3 times now. So it's a team that, like I said, they're pesky. And if Alabama's not fully focused, they're going to take the ball away.
Then the one player I'll throw out is, just when you talk about experience in this roster, I think the one name a lot of people will probably recognize, or at least college basketball fans will, is AJ Hoggard, one of their guards, averaging about 11, 4.5 assists. Nate Oates kind of talked about his playmaking on Monday. He's really, really good. Transfer from Michigan State. He's kind of if I'm watching a player on Vanderbilt, he'd be kind of my one to watch. And I kind of want to do that now more. We got to find the next Malik Dia, it seems like, because he made us look like fools for not mentioning him in the pre Ole Miss show. So if AJ Hoggard has a good game, you heard it here first. But Alabama will obviously be looking to neutralize him. Any final thoughts from you, Tony, as Alabama preps for Vanderbilt? Maybe a quick take on this game. I think you teed it up well with, you got to do it on a cold Tuesday night in Coleman with no fans.
Yeah. Another person too is Devin McLaughlin, 10.7 points, 7.9 rebounds. And he's also shooting 35.7% from three. He's a 6'7", 230-pound junior. He's going to be kind of Vanderbilt's center. If you're looking for another Malik Dia, maybe that's where you look.
I was going to say that build is awfully similar.
I know. The similarities between this Vanderbilt team and the Ole Miss team are very alarming. So that's the only thing I'd say.
Alabama certainly has to come ready. Like I said, 6 p.m. Tuesday night on SEC Network. We'll be there. So subscribe to Tide Illustrated for all the coverage of that game. And drop us a sub and a like on the video here. If you're watching for the first time, if you're listening on Spotify, give us a follow. You can leave a comment there as well. And tune in. We're going to be running these podcasts throughout the rest of Alabama's run that they're hoping will be a deep one into the NCAA tournament. Tide picking up a huge win against Kentucky. Let's see what they make of Vanderbilt on Tuesday night. Jack Knowlton, Tony Tsoukalis signing off. Go subscribe here on the YouTube and subscribe on Tide Illustrated. We will see you next time.